The pen was in my hand. My best friend was smiling at me from across the kitchen table, her hands folded neatly in front of her like a woman who had nothing to hide. My husband was in his wheelchair 3 feet away, and he made a sound that I will never forget for the rest of my life. It wasn't a word. After the accident, full words were difficult. They came out tangled sometimes, the syllables refusing to line up the way his mind needed them to. But that sound was different from his usual struggle. It wasn't frustration. It wasn't pain. It was desperation, raw and trembling and aimed entirely at me. And in 11 years of knowing him, I had never heard my husband sound like that. I almost signed the papers anyway. I was that close. The pen was touching the first signature line. I almost told myself he was confused, that he didn't understand what the documents were, that I was handling it, and he should rest. I looked up. His eyes were locked onto mine, not clouded the way they sometimes got when the headaches came, not distant, clear and focused and terrified. I put the pen down. Before I tell you what was on those papers, and what I found after, please subscribe to Heart Path Stories and like this video, because what happened in that room still shakes me when I sit with it, and I need you to hear every part of this. My name is Hattie. I want to tell you about the year I thought I was the one holding everything together, and how badly I was wrong. Kate and I had been together for 9 years, and married for 5 when October changed everything. He was an engineer. The quiet, meticulous kind, who noticed when a doorframe was 2 millimeters out of plumb and would mention it once, gently, then never bring it up again. He made breakfast on Sunday mornings without being asked. He remembered the names of my coworkers' children. He was the kind of person who made the people around him feel seen without ever trying to make it obvious. He was driving home from a work conference when another driver ran a red light and struck his car on the driver's side. The impact was severe. It took over 40 minutes for paramedics to free him from the wreckage. He survived. That sentence was the only thing I could hold on to in those first weeks. He survived. But surviving looked different than I had imagined it would. The head trauma caused a hemorrhagic stroke. His right side lost significant function. His speech, which had always been one of my favorite things about him, that deliberate, thoughtful way he chose his words, became fragmented and effortful. Some days he could get out full sentences. Other days it was like watching someone try to navigate a city, where all the street signs had been rearranged in the night. I took a leave from my job without hesitating. Cade would have done the same for me, and I knew that without question. What I hadn't anticipated was how completely the practical side of life would refuse to pause. Insurance claims, medical billing disputes, disability paperwork, the mortgage, utilities. Everything kept moving on its regular schedule while our world had stopped entirely. I was spending hours on hold with insurance representatives while simultaneously learning how to assist with Cade's physical therapy exercises, tracking his medications, making sure he was eating. I stopped sleeping well. I stopped eating regularly. Friends texted, and I couldn't find the words to write back, so I didn't. That was when Lois arrived. Lois and I had been close since 2nd grade. We grew up in the same small town, went to separate colleges but kept in constant contact, and had the kind of friendship that resumes exactly where it left off after months of distance. She was at our wedding. She was in the hospital waiting room the night of the accident, sitting in an uncomfortable plastic chair at 2 in the morning, and she was still there when the doctor came out to talk to me. When she showed up 6 weeks into Cade's recovery with 2 suitcases and a box of groceries, I didn't ask questions. I moved aside and let her in. She had arranged to work remotely for as long as we needed. She sorted the mail, made phone calls on my behalf, organized Cade's medical records into a binder I could actually navigate. She drove him to his Thursday therapy appointments when I needed to stay home. She cooked dinner most nights. Real dinners, the kind with multiple components and fresh vegetables. Not the rotisserie chicken and crackers I had been managing on my own. She sat up with Cade on the nights he couldn't sleep so that I could rest. Everyone kept telling me how fortunate I was. Cade's mother said it over video call. The physical therapist mentioned it. A neighbor brought it up in the driveway one afternoon, unprompted. I agreed with all of them. Cade and Lois had always gotten along easily. She teased him about his taste in music. He teased her back about her inability to parallel park. When all three of us were in the same room, the conversation moved naturally, and the evenings felt lighter than they had any right to. But around the second month of her staying with us, something shifted. It was small at first. When Lois would come into a room and speak to Cade directly, he would go still in a particular way. Not the comfortable stillness of someone listening. Something contained. Watchful. Like a person sitting very quietly in a room where they are being watched, trying not to show that they know. I told myself it was the stroke. Mood changes and social fatigue were documented effects of what he had been through. I told myself I was reading too much into things because I was exhausted, and exhaustion makes everything feel ominous. Then, there was the mail. Managing our mailbox had always been Cade's habit, one of those small domestic rituals that had never been discussed but had simply become his. After the accident, I stopped thinking about it. Lois said she would handle it. I was grateful. One afternoon in December, I happened to be near the front door when the mail carrier came, and I picked it up before Lois could get to it. In the stack was a letter from a financial company I had never heard of. The name on the account was mine. The account number was unfamiliar. When I asked Lois about it later, she was making dinner, and she answered without turning around. She said it was related to a medical equipment financing arrangement she had set up. Something more cost-effective than the standard billing, and that she would walk me through the paperwork when she had it in front of her. Her voice was easy, unbothered. I let it go. I told myself it was exhaustion. That was true. I also told myself that questioning Lois would be a kind of ingratitude I couldn't afford to feel, not toward the person who was keeping our lives functional. That was the more dangerous thing I told myself. Cade was quiet at dinner that night. I assumed it was pain. 3 weeks later, Lois came home in the early afternoon carrying a leather portfolio. She seemed cheerful. She made tea. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and laid the portfolio open between us. She said she had been coordinating with the insurance company, and there were a couple of documents they needed from me. Something about a secondary benefits authorization. A form related to the home modification grant we had applied for in November. Her explanation was quick and smooth, and I followed most of it, the way you follow something when you're tired and you trust the person speaking. She placed a pen near my hand. That was when I heard the sound of Cade's wheelchair moving in the hallway. He had navigated from the living room on his own, which he rarely attempted without help. Maneuvering through the doorframe required effort and coordination he didn't always have. But there he was, in the kitchen doorway, his left hand on the wheel, his right hand pressing flat against his thigh. He made that sound, low and raw and urgent in a way that bypassed language entirely. It was not a word, it landed in my chest like a stone breaking the surface of water. "Cade," Lois said. Her voice had shifted in a way I noticed only later, thinking back. "You should rest, honey. This is just routine." His eyes didn't move to her. They stayed on me. I set the pen down and looked at the documents. Really looked for the first time. My name was at the top of both pages. Below my name, in smaller text, were words that Lois had not mentioned during her explanation. The phrase property lien, our address. "What exactly is this for?" I said. "The grant application," I explained. "I want to see the original grant letter," I said. "Can you get it?" A pause, not long, but it was there. "It's in my car," she said. "I can go grab it." She didn't move. I got up from the table and walked to Cade. When I was close enough, he reached for my hand. He almost never initiated touch because the unreliability of his grip frustrated him deeply. He held on with every bit of strength in his fingers. With his other hand, he pointed toward the hallway, toward his room. I wheeled him back. His tablet was on the nightstand, where it usually sat for audiobooks and video calls with his mother. He picked it up with the slow, deliberate care of someone who had been practicing a specific motion. He opened a folder I had never seen, buried 3 levels deep in his files. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Some were photos of documents, taken at an angle, slightly blurred, the kind of pictures you take in a hurry when you cannot be caught taking them. Others were screenshots of banking pages. I scrolled through them while Cade sat beside me and watched my face. There were 3 loan accounts opened in my name over the previous 2 months. One of them showed a drawdown of nearly $42,000. There was a credit card I had never applied for. Balance just under $9,000. There were screenshots of our joint account, the one Cade's disability payments deposited into, with a series of transfers at amounts small enough not to trigger automatic alerts, spaced just far enough apart, all of them to the same external account. At the bottom of the folder was a document I recognized, the power of attorney form that Lois had mentioned weeks ago, framing it as something we might eventually need for Cade's ongoing care. She had said she would handle getting it properly notarized when the time came. The signature line at the bottom had my name on it. In my handwriting, I had never signed it. My hands were shaking by the time I walked back into the kitchen. Lois was still at the table. She had refilled her tea. The leather portfolio was still open. I placed the tablet on the table in front of her and said nothing. She looked at the screen. Something in her face went perfectly, carefully still. "This isn't what it looks like," she said. "Tell me what it looks like," I said. "Tell me all of it, from the beginning." She opened her mouth, then she closed it. And then, in a way I hadn't seen from her since we were children, she began to cry. Not quietly, the kind of crying that moves through your whole body. It came out in fragments over the following hour. Lois had made a series of financial decisions over the previous several years that had failed completely. She had lost the majority of her savings and accumulated significant debt she had told no one about. When Cade's accident happened and she saw our situation up close, the insurance settlement in process, the equity in our home, the disability payments arriving regularly, she had made a calculation. She had told herself it was temporary, that she would replace everything before we noticed, that she would fix her own situation and then put ours back exactly as she found it. She had been redirecting money into an account she controlled. The property lien documents were step 2. She had planned to refinance our house without my knowledge, extract the equity to cover her debts, and reconstruct everything quietly. I asked her about the power of attorney with the forged signature. She looked at the table. She said she had needed it to make the financial transactions cleaner. If Cade were documented as lacking decision-making capacity, something she had been quietly, carefully building a paper record for, with certain forms altered and certain medical notes reframed, she would have had legal authority to act on his behalf. She said she never meant for anyone to be seriously hurt. I thought about my husband, sitting in his wheelchair in the kitchen doorway. I thought about the photographs in that folder, about the weeks he had spent watching, waiting, taking pictures, one difficult motion at a time, unable to speak it clearly enough in words, but refusing to stop trying to show me. I asked Lois to leave. She gathered her things without argument and she left. I sat down on the kitchen floor. I don't know exactly how long I was there. When I went to find Cade, he was in his room. He was holding his tablet. He turned it toward me, and on the screen was a name and a phone number, our attorney. Then, carefully, with the measured pacing of someone who had rehearsed a sentence, he spoke. "I called him 2 days ago." I stared at him. "He knows," Cade said. "He already froze the accounts." It took several seconds for the full weight of that to reach me. While I had been sleeping, in the heavy, dreamless sleep of someone who has been running on empty for months, my husband had picked up his phone and called our attorney and in slow, effortful speech had communicated enough of what he knew to begin a process that would protect us. I asked him, when he had first suspected something was wrong. He told me, slowly, that it had started with the mail. He had noticed Lois reaching for it before I could and had begun to wonder, that he had heard her on the phone one night in the hallway, speaking low and fast, and caught words that didn't fit any explanation she had given us, that he had started photographing documents when she left them unattended, in rooms she thought he couldn't easily reach. I asked him why he hadn't tried harder to tell me sooner. He looked at me for a long moment. "You trusted her," he said. "I needed proof first, not just my word." The attorney had already contacted the bank fraud unit when Cade reached him. Law enforcement was involved within 2 days of my confrontation with Lois. She didn't attempt to disappear. She cooperated, perhaps because she understood by then that it was over. The investigation found everything in the tablet folder and considerably more. The fraudulent loans were voided. The forged power of attorney was invalidated. There were months of legal process ahead, and not all of it was simple. But the worst of what she had planned had been stopped before it could be completed. At her sentencing, wire fraud, identity theft, financial abuse of a dependent adult. She received 36 months. She looked diminished standing in that courtroom. She looked like someone who had convinced herself that need was the same thing as justification, and had been wrong about that in every direction. That night, after it was over, Kate and I sat on the back porch together. It was an evening in early spring, the kind where the light stays longer than you expect it to, and the air feels like a promise the season is making and actually intending to keep. He had a cup of coffee. I had a blanket over my lap. Neither of us said much for a while. He had been in intensive therapy for months by then, speech and physical both. His words came more easily. His right side was responding better than his doctors had originally projected. They used words like remarkable and ahead of schedule during his appointments, and I watched his face each time, because I had learned by then to read the small particular way. He smiled when he was proud of something, but didn't want to make a thing of it. I had asked him once why he hadn't told his therapist how much faster his recovery was going than what his progress charts reflected. He had taken a moment before answering. If she thought I was worse, he said, she got careless. He had made a choice. He had let Lois believe his silence was confusion. He had let her think his stillness was impairment, and in the space of that misunderstanding, working slowly and in secret, and with tremendous effort, he had assembled everything needed to stop her. I held his hand on the porch in the early spring evening. His grip was stronger than it had been. I have thought about that year every single day since it ended. I spent most of it believing I was the capable one. The one managing, functioning, holding the shape of our life together while everything tried to come apart. I was so sure of that. I was so deep in the exhaustion of it that I mistook busyness for clarity and caretaking for seeing. But my husband, who could not drive, who struggled to finish sentences, who needed assistance with things that had once been effortless, had seen everything I had completely missed. He had documented it. He had made the phone call. He had moved himself down a hallway on his own and found a way to stop me from signing my name to our own destruction. I thought I was protecting him. I wasn't looking closely enough to see that he was protecting me. There is a particular blindness that doesn't come from injury or illness or anything medical at all. It comes from love, from trusting someone so completely, from needing them so much, that you stop looking at what they are actually doing with that trust. The door is open because you left it open, because you were grateful, because you were tired, because they smiled at you in a way that felt like home. The people who can hurt you the most are almost never the ones you don't know. They are the ones you never thought to question. They are the ones who know where you keep everything, because you showed them yourself.